All right, so we're going to go ahead and start this seminar off. Go ahead and start off by introducing myself. I am James Watts. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel assigned to the Mission Command Training Program as a Senior Aviation OCT. So this is my third year in MCTP. I have seen a lot of different aviation operations to varying degrees of success, from not even executed because we realized we shouldn't have done it, to successful or not successful, all across that spectrum. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the deep area. The one thing that I'm going to focus on more than others, though, is attack operations. But what are some other operations that can occur in the deep area? We had a breakout of it yesterday for those of you who got to meet me there in the dry sense of humor. Air assault, I heard it, thought I heard it. I'll take that for $1. What are some other operations we can do? That's particularly what we're going to talk about here. An attack to destroy, disrupt, delay, defeat. So that's the tactical task. So they can be in or out of contact with friendly forces. So what are some other deep operations we can do? A raid, a reconnaissance and force, personnel recovery. Okay. We typically don't see that as much in the warfighter because there's a lot of things that you need to do as the air crew member when you go forward. Of like, you understand that that's on you. Don't let that happen to you, but it's on you. There's also artillery. So let's go to slide 2 on the left, 3 on the right, please. So you can do artillery as well, which kind of segues from what Colonel Johnson said. So the division has 2 main arms to fight that deep area, right? And here's the references that tell me that. And here's the agenda that kind of covers how we're going to kind of go through it. One of the references I want to call out is Fort Leavenworth has an Army University Press. And the Army University Press took a bunch of articles and put them into a LISCO series of books. And my favorite one is the Deep Maneuver one. I'm going to use that in particular later in the seminar. So if you go to the website here, Volume 5, and it's going to cover particular deep operations, a couple of them from the air perspective, and then a lot of what occurred in World War I, II, with regard to what deep operations will look like on the ground perspective, if you have that time and feel so inclined. It's also going to call out the Call Handbook 2202 MCTP references, things that we continuously see. All right? So let's go to 4 both, please. All right. So what's the deep area? We've kind of covered this. Let's do a little bit of check on learning because it's after lunch. Someone tell me what the deep area is. Someone back over on this side.
Beyond the Thistle.
Beyond the Thistle. Okay. Beyond the Thistle is in the deep area. What's another way to look at the deep area?
I'm just guessing, but the areas would be beyond, like what area AO would be assigned to brigades.
Boom.
Is that right?
Yes. All right. So the division close area is what you give to the brigades. The division rear area is what you don't assign to the brigades, and then there's the support area inside of it, and then there's the division deep area, like you mentioned. So that's kind of what we have going on. Who's responsible for the area that you don't assign to your subordinate brigades from the division perspective? I heard the CG, I heard the division. The answer is all of the above, right? So the CG is responsible for everything that does and doesn't happen. You know, who's ever been in command? You'll find out really quick once you've been in command what you are and are not responsible for, right? All sorts of crazy things. So the division commander is responsible for the deep area, right? The division commander cannot give that If the division commander gave that to a brigade, it would no longer be the deep area. It would be an area assigned to a brigade that the brigade can't do anything about, and then we're going to have a different discussion about why did you do that, right? But the deep area is what the division commander needs to do. So, over here, we're talking through the different types of operations that can occur in the deep area, right? So let's talk about the trends of what we see there. Can I get 5 on the left and 6 on the right? So here's my trends for the last 3 fiscal years. I've been in MCTP for 2 of them. Here's what we see, right? Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to focus on what occurred with the attack on the Medina Division in 2003. So what occurred in this particular operation was the 11th Attack Helicopter Regiment was given 3 Apache attack battalions. And what they were going to do was fly from objective rams through the Karbala Gap and attack to destroy targets and remnants or elements of the Medina Division that were going to influence 3rd ID coming through here and up to Baghdad, which is BIOPS, like right up here, right? So they're trying to make sure that uncommitted forces in the deep area are shaped and removed from the battlefield. So, who here as an OCT has ever heard from a training audience? That will never happen in real life. Raise your hand if you heard it. Raise it really high. That'll never happen in real life. This does happen in real life. Every one of those trends over there occurred over here. So, not synchronized information collection. Where's my friend from the S2 realms? All right. So, weather and just the ability to collect that far out did not exist weather existed in 2003, but then some of the other elements that were going to tell us what was there did not exist compared to what we have right now in 2003. But we did mitigate that with other sources of information collection. What we see in warfighters right now is we have all this information collection available to us, but no one sifts through it enough to pull the big piece of thread out and make sure we're looking at the right things at the right time with these missions. The collapse of planning horizons. Why do you think a collapse of planning horizons occurred?
Start planning too late.
You start planning too late. What's another reason you could have a collapse of planning horizon?
The focus is on the wrong area.
Focus is on the wrong area. I'm going to give something that occurs occasionally, and it surprises you every time. What happens when you're more successful than you thought you would be? No. You think you're going to have to do that operation in 96 hours, and now you have to do it in 72 or 48 because all of a sudden I was successful. And I'll get to that plan later. Whoa, you're going to get to that plan right now. So that occurred in this operation. Everybody was really happy with how the invasion to Iraq went to a certain point. And then the transportation company was attacked. And we're like, we need to kind of keep this moving because we want to keep that momentum, because as soon as the lines of communication started getting attacked, we started getting a little nervous. The planning horizons collapsed a little bit. Because of that, we employed the cab a lot quicker than we thought we would, leading into there. In this instance, they had seed planned, but we delayed the operations 2 hours and nobody told the Corps artillery people we're going to do the seed. So we integrated, but we didn't synchronize. And there was no EW used here, right? So conditions check. What echelon do you think this conditions check took place at? No, echelon, so corps, division, brigade, battalion. So it did not occur at division. This was a corps operation. So it's either, so I'll give you an A or B, corps or brigade. It occurred down at the brigade. It did not occur at the corps. But the corps was telling him, you need to do this, and here's all your resources. Now you do your own conditions check. Right? So we see this today. Hey, brigade commander, go fly that mission. Call me when you get back and do your assessment, right? Aviation planning and tasks not effectively synchronized with the joint air tasking cycle. We're going to talk through that. So one of the other issues that happened here is they thought that they were going to put 48 aircraft in the air. Sustainment didn't quite follow and get to objective rams in time. And they were only able to launch 32 of the 48 aircraft. So that's about 2/3 of the combat power that they wanted to have available, right? So it sounds like just about every warfighting function has been touched within this. And what I hear from the training audiences all the time is, oh, come on, man, we wouldn't really do this. And who's heard that before, right? So I bring you the problem set to highlight something that happened for real. The 2 battalions that comprise the 32 aircraft were combat ineffective after this for a period of 72 hours because none of the 32 aircraft that flew could fly again for 72 hours. So 2 aircrew members were captured, and we did not meet the effect. We had to slow down our attack into Baghdad. What happened, if you get to read the chapter on this in the AUP Deep Operations book, the 101st did an attack, taking all the notes that the 11th Regiment said that they should have done better with their division. They went out, conducted the attack, had the effects that were required, and 3rd ID was able to move through, and you go into Baghdad. So these things happen in real life. Can I get 7 on the left and 8 on the right? So how does a division prevent this from happening? What are things that divisions are supposed to do? We've kind of talked about the role of a division. What are things divisions are supposed to do? Can I get someone from this side, because I picked on that side a little bit? Divisions are supposed to shape, right? They're supposed to create windows of advantage, right? How many artillery tubes or rockets are organic to a cab? Someone from the fires community. I know we have a fires battalion here. 0. Good. Who owns that? Divardi does, and by extension of Divardi Division, right? So you're supposed to anticipate those transitions as to when you want to do a mission like this. Because the cab is designed to be the Army's way of the division getting after the deep fight. You know, the Army's like, we're going to buy helicopters will take care of it, artillery will take care of it, we'll put them together and they're going to do that, right? So if you don't take care of those forces, who's going to take care of that entire division sitting on the road to Baghdad? The brigade, right? And what do divisions do? They set conditions for brigades, right? So that's kind of where we're trying to get at here. Sometimes Colonel Johnson's able to tease this part out. I'm going to talk about here. One of the things you need to know when you're looking at a division as an OCT is who's telling the cab to go and what process is that going. So here's a group of people who should be telling the cab that they're going to conduct an attack. Someone tell me why a fist cord would be up there. Is the fist cord in the chain of command for the cab? Raise your hand if you think the fist cord's in the chain of command for the cab. Raise your hand. Anybody? No? Okay. Raise your hand if you think they're not in the chain of command for the cab. Okay, I see a bunch of hands. All right, so we're kind of all talking the same thing here. Why do you think the fist cord would say that the cab needs to conduct an attack?
Trip targeting process and how
Because the fist cord owns the targeting process, right? So is the cab doing these missions because we've directed them through the ATO site? That is a technique. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad technique. I'm saying it's a technique. It is a viable way to plan, to decide, if you're using D3A, what you're going to do for the cab. Why do you think why do you think the G3 might be up there? Maybe even the G5. Someone over here. Why do you think a G5 might do it?
G5 plans.
Plans, right? So is plans or targeting coming up with the requirement to do the mission? I would tell you that I'm not married to either. What does that CG want to do? I'm not married to either. What does the CG want to do? What is the form and venue for the decision to conduct this attack, the condition to start planning this attack? What is the venue for that? That's one thing that you'll want to tease out of this, right? When you go and work with the 28, how many aviators are you going to have with you? DCO's an aviator. We got a 150 over there. So we got a couple, and we are asking for some. But this is one of those ways, me as an aviator, sharing with the group, this is where I want to see, where's the tasking coming from, right? Who's coming up with it? So, playing with the G5 with an appropriate OPT, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So, so where does a cab sit at a targeting meeting? Former FSO within the cab. Where did you sit at NTC targeting meeting when you were an FSO for a cab squad in a cab?
Usually either with the BAO or if the squadron commander decided to show up with him.
There's a multitude of places that they'll end up sitting. Are you recommending? Is the cab recommending their utilization, or are they being told their utilization at a target working group? They should be recommending. Sometimes they're not, right? If the 7-minute drill doesn't tell everybody what they're doing when they go to that meeting, they may just be there like, hey, division said show up to the meeting, I showed up to the meeting. You know, but if within the terms of reference or within the 7-minute drill, the commanding general and the chief of staff and the fist board and the cab commander all kind of have an understanding of where is this going to come out of? Is it going to come out of a fires meeting, the target working group, target decision board, or a plans meeting? Where are my missions going to come from? And now I'm either finding my missions or nominating targets on behalf of those missions of the working group. What do you think there? These are choose your own adventures. If you get the right answer, if you find a way to answer the question, not the way to answer the question, is what I'm trying to tell you. So let's go to 9 left, 10 right. So over there, I had the targeting cycle, right? Over here, I have what we call a DOPT, Deep Operations Planning Team. And over here, I have planning responsibilities, right? The division is asking the cab to go into their deep area and conduct the meeting. So who owns the mission? Or conduct the operation? Who owns the operation? The division. I'm hearing it whisper. The division owns it. So who plans it? The division plans it, right? So this is a way we have decided, I'm using that word very intentionally for D3A, we have decided that we're employing the cab. Now I want to go over to the other one. Now we have to prepare that. I'm going to weave in between the operations process and the targeting process here. Please bear with me as I go schizophrenic. I'm going to weave between them. So now I've decided to go into detect and prepare at the same time. So there's different points along your timeline. You're going to want to start doing things by conducting back briefs, doing orders, conducting targeting meetings, all sorts of activities within that 96-hour timeline. That's why we say, hey, we'd like 96 hours to do things. It's not because we're taking a nap for 96 hours. Although that's what Colonel Manor thinks I do, and that's why it looks so young. So, but there's all sorts of things that you're trying to do. You're trying to get intel to build a good collection matrix. You're trying to get yourself into the right spot in the priorities of fires for fires. So what's one thing, if I'm going to be shooting a 70-kilometer MLRS mission that I want to make sure fires is ready to do? Raise your hand if you're a fires person. All right, what do you think I need to do if I'm going to ask you to do a 70-kilometer shot? Airspace. So I want to get that up. What else? Clear ground 4. I got to get something into that PAA, right? So I may need to maneuver the BCT to get the FLOT to a certain point where I can put my PAA in, right? That might take about 30 hours just to get them to this point and get out of the PAA at this point, right? Who thinks that flat pieces of ground that are really stable are nice places to put PAAs? No? Why not? Easily detected. But when you look on a map really quick and you're only given a minute to find it, it'll only take a minute to find it, right? And that's where you'll go. So if you give them plenty of time to, hey, you need to get to this area, now they're not fighting with sustainment, because sustainment's going to want to go to something that an uneducated person would put a PAA on, because that's a great place to put a sustainment fleet. So now you have time to say, all right, we can put the PAA here. We can put the FARP here. I can build an airspace system for that, right? I have all my maneuver people taking this space so that I can get to this point of this uncommitted force 96 hours from now. You know, we're constantly looking at it through the targeting process. What did Colonel Johnson mention a minute ago? What happens within like that 48, 24-hour part of the targeting process? It begins with R. We're refining it, right? We're constantly refining it. We're constantly preparing, making sure that we're doing the proper detection so we don't run into the trends that we run into, right? So these are things that work. Now, while the division is doing a lot of this planning, what are things that the brigade and the battalion are doing? Because this is really a 3-echelon fight. They're preparing. So I heard airspace from some of the fires people. They're working airspace, they're getting their FARPs put out, they're driving them to the places they need to be. What are some other things that they're doing? What do you think the division's going to want from the cab during this time period? There you go. About power. Who's going to tell them that? Have S3? S3 is a busy man. That person hasn't slept in like 16 hours. So it's getting to the 24-hour mark, and Colonel Manning likes to remind me I like my crew rest. So who's going to help the S3 with that? L&Os from a command and control perspective. So the L&Os are helping the battalion or squadron and the cab get this information to division, right? So when you're starting to stand up a DOPT, or you're starting to talk about conducting these missions, where's the cab L&O in this process? That's something that any maneuverer, C2 OCT can do. If you're a fires OCT and you're looking at the target working group, who from the cabs there? Is it the cab L&O? Is it the cab FSO? What are they bringing to? These are all things we kind of need to take a look at, because this isn't a mission that the Army's done much. I think the last time that we did a 24 helicopter or above attack into a deep area was when we did the successful mission against the Medina Division 48 hours after we did the unsuccessful attack mission against the Medina Division. So this isn't something that everybody's got a lot of muscle memory with, right? So compared to an aerosol, who in here has done an aerosol? Raise your hand really high, you've done an aerosol. Okay, keep your hand up if you've done an aerosol of more than like 5 aircraft. All right, keep it up if you've done more than 10. So we have a lot more muscle memory with doing bigger aerosols than we do doing these attacks. So what we see is that because we haven't done this much, and who's heard of the Gold Book? Raise your hand if you've heard of the Gold Book. All right, everybody likes to use the Gold Book. What is the Gold Book? Someone tell me what the Gold Book is. It's an SOP. From where? 101st. It's really a good product. The folks in the 101st, they use that like a Bible. About once a month, they're doing some big aerosol. They're even getting more Chinooks so that they can exercise it even better. Right, with the whole waypoint 2028. There's not much muscle memory. So watch how all that goes. How are these people interacting? Because they don't have an off-the-shelf Gold Book. But a lot of the things in the Gold Book about how to get in and out of an objective are about the same thing. Because Black Hawks don't stay once the aerosol goes. They go back too, right? They go in, they come back. A lot. If you're doing an attack, the Apaches won't be staying on the objective long, because hopefully they found the target, hopefully they're spending their ammunition, and they're going back with just enough ammunition to protect themselves. So, are there any questions on a depot PT or doing actions at echelon for planning? That's what's really fun about this, is watching the social experiment of people from 3 different echelons planned. So, all right, so let's go to slide 11 for both. All right, raise your hand if you're from the 2 shop or you do the intel warfighting function. All right, so we talked about it a little bit earlier. Talk to me about some issues that you might see with information collection as we lead into one of these attacks.
There's no LPIOD. I need to know when the last time this information is going to be of value. If it's going to Arctier or warfighters spirit balloons on the ground. I need to know when the last time they need this information.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to affect election. That's going to affect whenever the 3 is able to actually pass this. Is it tied to mission, or is it something we can move off the track?
Okay, that's some really good data. So, anybody else from the intel warfighting function want to talk about one of the issues that we might have with information collection? There you go.
As soon as seen too many, units want a, register, you just got a Hellfire on it, when all you need is FMV. And I got 3 other assets that don't have Connecticut ability to supply that type of information, provide that type of information.
Okay.
Collection managers is usually an impressive on them. For your request for collections, request capability, not an asset. You're more likely to get, now if you're very specific in what you're requesting, then that will help you out. Especially if you can find what you want to a higher echelon or multiple echelons, this collection will help out this unit here, this unit here, and this unit here.
Now, one thing that we see about that is many cabs will want to have the gray goal. Where does the gray goal reside? Within the cab. They will want one of those gray goals that the cab flies to work with the Apaches to assist with longer range man-on-man teaming. Right? The cab commander likely has the Grable company, if they're on the same rotation cycle as their attack battalions. They like them working together because the attack battalion right now is a lot more better suited with what we have coming up with 2028 to go far into the deep area. Okay, so they're going to want to try to pair them together. What do you think the G2 is going to think about pulling a couple Grables off of collection lines to help the cab at this time? It's going to be an area of conflict. So, and we see it every time. We tease it out at academics. This is usually the part where I bring this up, and I watch the two and the cab commander fight for about 20 minutes. So, it's going to be an issue. Who's the arbiter of that decision? Who owns the grade? The Division CG. Who's supposed to publish an IC matrix? Someone who's going to be helping the G3 out. The G3. The G3 shop runs it. So, one of the tricks to make sure when this conversation starts happening, coach that Division G3, come out and be like, hey, this kind of sounds like a me problem, not a you two problem. I arbitrate this, right? Get them involved early and often to arbitrate this problem, because it's going to be a problem. Every time it's a problem. So, what is a document that could help refine our collection processes so we understand what the G2's requirement is? And I'm trying to find the enemy in a 96-hour timeline. Event temp. What we'll see is a sit temp. What we rarely see is an event temp. Then the planning horizons collapse. We know where they are now. We try to keep constant contact, but we don't try to say where are they going to be in 72, 24 hours to regain contact with them. It's like, okay, they're out there, but there's nothing I can do about it, so why am I collecting against it? Let me come over here. You know, a good event temp can help arbitrate what the real requirement is for the two, so that they understand what their real requirement is, so that they can broker a better deal with the G3, the event temp, right? So let's go to slide 12 on both. So dividing or fab support to the CAD. This is another contentious one. So how does seed work for the 28? Who plans the seed? Air defense. So what'll end up happening is nobody gets the rose pinned on them to plant the seed, and then the cab commander and the fab commander start fighting over seed, right? Is that a DeVarty responsibility or fab responsibility, a cab responsibility, or a division responsibility?
Let's go out and say it's division responsibility.
It's a division
They're
responsibility.
shaping the flag, that's
Yes.
the part of shaping the flag.
So when you start seeing the cab commander and the fab commander fighting, and I saw this when I OCT the 28th, when they start fighting each other over like, hey man, I don't like you anymore because you want me to fire seed and no one's taking anything, no one's doing anything with our artillery, you know, the division needs to step in and be like, all right, this is the minimum level of seed that they need. This is the EW that they need. You know, the division's the arbiter. When you start seeing people below the division commander, M or O, the S, the chief of staff, and the G3 fighting, is when they kind of come up and they start arbitrating that stuff. So, a technique, when you start seeing that fighting go on between the DeVarty and the cab, is if the DeVarty takes care of the air defense and the cab takes care of artillery, you don't have to worry about the tanks for long because the tanks ain't going to be there. The op force tanks will not be there without artillery. The cab wants to go out and kill the tanks because that's what we were trained to do in flight school. You know, all of us who went to flight school before the GWAT was really a thing. Hey, we're going to destroy the advanced guard main body. Bunch of tanks. Go destroy the artillery. Now the DeVarty or fab commander's happy, and the cab commander's happy because they get utilized. Now you're starting to make peace between them. And peace is better in a warfighter, especially when you're tired, when you're angry, someone ran out of coffee, no one can see because the generator ran out of gas. Make peace. Help them with the solutions to their problem. So let's go to 13 both, please. So here's some keys to success. So if the division focus their lethal and non-lethal, it's best to utilize the cab, mask their effect at a time that you can mask lethal and non-lethal effects. What do you think I mean by non-lethal? What's the best way of doing that? EW, cyber. I already talked about the event temp. Specificity about the purpose and what the attack aviation is to destroy. So, what sounds like a good attack mission? What's a good attack mission for a cab? If you do a sketch and statement for a COA, they would match up. Attack 2, destroy, disrupt, delay, divert, defeat, something like that. If you say that, and then you tell the cab, the purpose is to destroy this much of whatever. Now the cab knows how many aircraft they need, they know how many Hellfires they need, and they can get at the COFOMs that Lieutenant Colonel Johnson talked about earlier. So when you get to the certain phase of the operation, the enemy is the size of your choosing at the location of your choosing. So be specific. When attack to a trip, that's not really, I don't know if I came back successful or not. And then what that does is like, hey, I did not do what you wanted me to do you want me to reattack? Is that fair? Because you get that immediate assessment. The assessment comes in this, like when you do D3A, if you can't assess what you decided because you were too vague, then you may not be scratching your commanding general's itch, right? Talk about information collection. Stay nested within the ATO cycle. And then make sure that what you're doing isn't just, we're gonna start talking about protection and sustainment here in a little bit. Make sure that the sustainment folks and the protection folks are keeping up with the assets that are unable to cab, whether it's the radar that's protecting the rocket artillery and counterfire, or whether or not it's the FARP. Make sure that all those assets are protected along the way so that when it's time to deliver, you have a small window of opportunity for success. You don't want to be like, well, I lost it 3 weeks ago, or three days ago because I couldn't protect it. Another thing that divisions can start looking at is slide 14 on the right. Conditions check. So again, multi-echelon social experiment, conditions check. Some things are for a battalion commander to worry about. Some things are a brigade commander to worry about. What are the conditions checks that a division commander needs to worry about? Or maybe the conditions checks taken by the DCGO, because this is a discrete operation over a small period of time. A lot of units get sideways because they have an SOP conditions check they'll just throw out. They fail to verify that against METTC. You know, is that conditions check valid for what they're doing? So that's a place to kind of help them look. So where's the conditions check? Who's taking it? Is it valid against METTC? So slide 15 on both. I hate when I do this class right after a lunch. Are there any questions before I hand it over to the head table? None? You got it?
I just want to actually maybe make a comment based on Compo 2 SRM cycles, if you will. The cabs and the division staffs are on entirely different SRM cycles, and they likely have lost the ability to train this on a regular basis. I know for a fact that 28th is like that. The 28 ECAB and the 28th Division are on completely different SRM cycles, you know, whatever we're going to call it, rearm cycles, whatever.
So that's correct. So when 28th ID did their warfighter, 28th ECAB was in the CENTCOM AOR, and they had the 11th ECAB. So this will happen about once every 5 warfighters with a Compo 1 division in CAB, but it happens every warfighter with a Compo 2.
And so in response to that, the aviation branch, I'm sure you're tracking this as well, has been working at an enterprise level branch-wide SOP. They're calling it the ABOS. It won't come into play. I don't know if it's come into play with warfighters yet, perhaps, but it's supposed to be a branch-wide SOP that helps defeat some of that task atrophy. But again, that hasn't even been remotely scratched at the Compo 2 level yet.
So Fort Rucker has a branch-wide SOP.
Yeah.
Yes. It is really good for companies and platoons.
Yeah.
Fort Rucker's products are not well suited for battalions, brigades, divisions, and corps. And that's, so who's familiar with T&EOs? You will find a T&EO for a division air assault. The highest level that a T&EO exists for cab attack, for an attack with A-64s, is at the battalion level. Because the people who own the T&EO think that that isn't a division or a cab mission. And they reside at Fort Rucker. So, but I just displayed to you who goes into the deep area. So that particular mission, who has ever heard the term deep attack? Okay. That mission is the reason why they stopped using the word deep and the word attack sequentially. Because there's a little bit of fear of it. Never mind, it worked 48 hours later. We're always afraid of our failure, not afraid of our success. So, Rucker does have that. Compo 2, and you're gonna notice it, what's the low con plan for the 28th ID in their aviation, in the exercise?
We got officers coming from the actual downtrain units. So each of their brigades are gonna have people from that brigade.
Okay.
All of those.
That-
Good question.
Is the CAB commander gonna play a part?
I don't know. I would assume, no.
So typically, when the requisite rank and experience represents a low-con unit, you have a lot more success. When the nearest available first lieutenant, who just graduated flight school, represents the unit, that person is all sorts of motivated, and that person will provide you all the things that the Army requires of them in about 10 or 15 years because of the learning experience that they're going to go through over the next 5 days. They're going to get a lot of love and attention. It's something to think through. Who's going to be able to influence that commanding general as to how I'm going to do this because they have the relationship or don't have the relationship? Who here's ever been given, we talked about it earlier, the enablers come in, I don't know you, I don't know what you do, I have a seat for you over here, I don't have a computer for you, it doesn't have a drop, if you brought your own. And we see that a lot with Compo 2 and 3 units, and nobody's doing it in fairness. It's, when you only have so many days, how often are you able to build a relationship with somebody where you can kind of be like, hey man, when I speak, you're listening to me because we have a good relationship. That's half the reason we do the academics, is we hang out with these guys trying to build a relationship so that we can influence them. And then we try to make sure it's all the same thing from him down to us, so that when he goes and talks to the chief of staff, it's the same story of we're trying to influence you in the same direction. And what will happen to a Compo 2 or 3 unit is we're not able to do that as much as we are with a Compo 1 unit that does, it's their own cab. We do run into, here and there, Compo 1 cabs and Compo 1 divisions not being from the same installation and a little bit of that, but a lot more on 2 and 3. If there's no other questions from the back.
I got one real quick. So as we kind of talked about transitions and kind of tying back to kind of reconnaissance and reconnaissance handover as you go from deep to close, is there any mechanisms inside the warfighter exercise? And I know it kind of goes to that point where we talk the low-con, elements that are playing underneath. Is there any metric that you guys observe to kind of see how well that recon handover goes between those division assets down to the brigade to see how that transitions?
So one thing that we'll do, we have a lot of ways to collect that. Every day, our info systems people are making sure that they have the same things like a common intelligence picture. So our intel OCTs will go between echelon and see whether or not the division has the same site picture as the brigade, and depending on the exercise construct, the brigade may be a training audience, and does the battalion see the same thing? If they're all seeing the same thing, it's usually a good thing. That's especially if they see the same thing over time, right? Like in 24 hours we expect this, and in 72 hours we expect that. So you kind of have to go through and be able to talk to them and be able to see what their systems are doing and what analysis they're doing out of it. And that's the tricky part, is to make sure that they're all on the same page. And I think Colonel Thomas mentioned it earlier, if there's no sync between the G2s to make sure that the low cons understand what's going on and have the ability to vote of, hey, that's not what I'm seeing down here, then you run into a problem.
So, how many Apaches are in an ECAB? 0. Okay, how many Apache drivers are in an ECAB?
Depends.
Like maybe a guy who went through flight school or one of the warrants, who transitioned to another frame or has moved on, you know, might not be on flight status anymore, and he's now in that, you get what smell what I'm cooking here, right? So now I'm taking a division headquarters, their habitual relationship with the ECAB is not their habitual relationship. They're given another ECAB, and nobody understands what we're talking about, what the frame is capable of. I don't mean this in a bad way, please. Don't take any of this wrong. It's the cards we're given. So how do we mitigate that? How do we help coach, teach, and mentor them through that process? It is a process. A lot of it has to do with what we talked about, collapsing the planning horizons, right? If we're saying in 3 days we want them to do this mission, and something happens, and the CG is now in the close fight, and he's like, well, we'll launch the cab on that in 18 hours, or what did we see one time, like 8 hours or something?
2.
Yeah, well, now we're not going to talk about that. But at the end of the day, all those things that we talked about, and you have the slides for reference, and Colonel Watts is available to talk to too, and he'll talk about some other TTPs with the whole ECAP thing, you know. But at the end of the day, they're already starting from a deficit. Okay, so don't allow. Well, I say allow. They're going to do what they do. Try and coach, teach them, and mentor them through. Hey, we should probably stay on task and on target with what we're doing with that. And then we can re-roll where they're going to attack. You know what I mean? 48 hours out, you could probably change where they're going easier than going backwards and saying, I want you to launch in 24 hours. Does that make sense? So it is a very complicated problem set. It really is. But it starts with the ECAB has no Apaches in it, very little experience. I mean, we had like 2 Cobra guys, and I think it was a 20. Didn't they have a Cobra guy?
They had a Cobra. Someone had, yeah, there was the division had a Cobra guy.
Yeah, they had a guy who had flown Cobras, so he knew, I mean, he knew the blocking and tackling of the mission, but he had never flown an Apache, so he didn't understand the Apache takes a lot of support to make it go, right? I mean, you saw it up there. We deployed to combat with 48 Apaches, and 31 of them could get in the air that day that they wanted to do this attack. You know what I'm saying? It is not a easy airframe to manage, to sustain, and the crews, after they do this, when are they ready to do another mission?
So another question I'll ask is how frequently do you think you're going to be able to do this? And typically, the sweet spot's about 48 hours for the next mission.
So now you're losing that asset for another 48 hours. I hayed them to this. I crunched my timeline down, and now I'm wondering why I just lost 14 Apaches on a 28 or a 24 Apache attack. You know, and now what I've got left, I can't re-roll for 48 hours. Make sense? So kind of ask them leading questions. Like I say, if you have questions about TTPs, get with Colonel Watson. He can walk you through them, okay?
I had a question over here.
Yes, sir. I was just going to say, the same thing has to be kept in mind for your Apaches, where you mentioned crew rest, same thing for your collection for any manned asset. How long are you putting your scouts out for? I guarantee your scouts and your rangers are not going to be out there for 72 hours, 96 hours consistently with 0 rest. They're not collecting for 96 hours straight. But your aircraft can't happen. You have time on target to take your lead factor, and it's the things that we have seen that we have to reinforce too, at least on my side, collection managers, and 2s and 3s and personal that are actually in the collection.
100%. I mean, anything that involves people is going to need some sort of break in between, whether it's aircraft or guys on the ground. Now, guys that aren't operating in the 3rd dimension, it's a little bit different because they can break in place and things like that. But all those systems need maintenance, need crew rest, I can go down the list. But just all things to take into consideration and good leading questions to ask. I will warn you too. Warsim will create some bad habits, right? The warfighter will create a bad habit because necessarily all those things don't factor in. Now we will backstop, we will say, well, you know, you can't do this, that, or the other thing, because you can't really do it, but it starts to get dicey, yes.
Is the length of crew rest something that is a risk factor that the commander has the ability to prevent?
Yes.
So it's all, it's, they have that fixed, they have a fixed crew rest time based off doctrine, right?
Not off doctrine, off the SOP.
That's what we.
So the SOP is gonna state it, right? So here's a couple things that we haven't quite thought through. How long do you think a division can sustain combat operations? I haven't covered it, see what people think. This is a good discussion point. I'm about to make the other aviator like him over here. He's gonna like really come after me after this one. Division can fight for 7 days. About 36 hours, 7, 8 days on the long end. What do you think it's doing after those 7 or 8 days? Someone's doing an F-pull, and it's refitting and all that stuff. So, I don't play the fighter management game too much beyond a certain point, or up to a certain point. There's a certain point that I'll hit, I'll be like, all right, you need to start playing fighter management. Because you're going to, if I gotta live for 7 days, or hey, the horde's coming, and I need to get aircraft out because we're about to get overrun. If tanks are about to drive through your assembly area, you're not gonna be sleeping anyway, right? So, we do enforce to a degree fighter management, but this isn't LISCO of I need to fly every day for the next 365 days, or 9 months, or whatever the rotation is. There's a marathon and a sprint part of this. This is about a 10K, right? I need to go fast. I can wear myself down, but I don't have to worry about what mile 26 looks like for my air crews.
The only thing I'll kind of add, taking it a bit different direction. So we've talked air, we've talked reconnaissance, we've talked several different pieces of the division, and hopefully you're starting to see some common trends. The requirement to synchronize, the requirement to fight the deep fight, and the requirement to manage seams and transitions and resolve friction points. That's what the division's doing. Seams, transitions in the planning horizons, in the deep fight to the close fight. There's a bunch of different things I could mean by seams and transitions. And in friction points, he brought up a really good one. Some organizations in the division have a foot in the deep fight and a deep in the close fight. The FAB, the CAB, they may be doing a little bit of both. And so a lot of that kind of results in friction is I'm asking them to do something in the deep fight when they're also kind of having responsibilities in the close fight. Or we haven't referred back to our decision matrix and who's deciding what and figured out and actually enforcing who's resolving those disputes. So things to kind of think about and to look at as we're supporting the 28.
Thank you, John.
Okay, Hazy, we'll take 5.